So, where do we go from here? Whenever science diplomacy is put into practice, it's important that scientific and diplomatic goals remain clearly defined to avoid the undue politicization of science. Only by thoughtfully integrating the actions, mechanisms, and communities of science diplomacy can we address national and global priorities and challenges that require international engagement. What does this look like? There are three components: strategies, mechanisms, and communities. First, strategies ensure that science is considered and fully integrated into the diplomatic goals and the formulation of foreign policy. Second, the mechanisms provide the tools and means that enable science to be integrated into diplomatic engagements and for scientists and diplomats to interact. And finally, the communities. Encourage scientists to engage on foreign policy issues and promote scientific training among the diplomatic corps. All three of these components serve to build trust between the scientific and diplomatic worlds. Science diplomacy can be driven by individuals, but more and more, countries are developing their own national approaches to science diplomacy. We've already talked about the ways that scientific superpowers like the US and the EU can use the soft power aspect of science diplomacy. But superpowers aren't the only states that can engage in science diplomacy. It can also be a way for small or middle-income countries to fuel their development. A great example of this is Costa Rica.
I represent Costa Rica, a middle-income country that does not have oil or gas. We have to develop based on science and technology. And we engage with the United States to try to find areas of mutual interest where we can potentiate that development. We are not subject to aid, but science diplomacy has proven to be a very rich source of a cooperation agenda.
Each country has its own set of motivations for engaging science diplomacy. This can include building stronger alliances, projecting national values and influence, integrating regionally, developing economically, and engaging diasporas. To pursue these goals, there's a growing awareness of the need for scientific input in foreign policy. In 1999, the US National Academy of Sciences concluded that 13 out of the 16 US foreign policy goals have science, technology, or health considerations. That influential report led to the appointment of the first science advisor to the Secretary of State.
Further, it led to a dramatic increase in the number of PhD scientists receiving fellowships through AAAS and other scientific organizations to work in the State Department or the US Agency for International Development. I was one of those fellows. Today, 7 nations have scientific advisors in their foreign ministries, and more nations are moving in a similar direction.
This not only increases their ability to integrate scientific evidence into diplomatic action, but also allows them to actively seek scientific partnerships.
Embassies will often receive instructions from back home on what type of collaboration or cooperation to look for. In science diplomacy, sometimes we find opportunities that then we bring back home and play matchmaker with an institution or a scientist at home to address a real-world problem. We have done this with universities in looking for addressing healthcare needs in our country. We recently contacted a university to look at traffic problems and innovations in transportation. We've addressed institutions in the United States and got them on board to assess our water resources and so forth. So sometimes the collaboration is born in the embassy.
Throughout this course, we've seen ways that both institutions and individuals can contribute to and benefit from science diplomacy.
We no longer live in a world where any one country can stand alone. Improving and enhancing our cooperation in areas of common interest is of mutual benefit.
If you're a scientist, you have a responsibility and opportunity to participate in the world beyond your own laboratory.
And if you're a practitioner of international relations, you have a responsibility and opportunity to utilize the best science. At the end of the day, science diplomacy is as much about developing and growing trust between scientists and diplomats as it is about relationships between countries and the role of science.
So diplomats can feel more confident about reaching into the scientific community, and scientists can look more broadly at their international interactions, not limiting themselves to one-on-one research collaborations. We know this isn't necessarily easy, but both scientists and diplomats need to find ways to spend time together and learn from one another.
Governments are increasingly building scientific capacity in their foreign policy structures. And non-governmental scientific organizations like AAAS, the World Academy of Sciences, professional societies, and national academies are all helping the scientific communities to engage beyond national and scientific boundaries.
And ultimately, that's how we will meet the big challenges for humanity over the coming century, with science, with technology, and with diplomacy.